So a couple weeks ago, I made mention that we were going to test the Ryzen 5 5600, not to be confused with the 5600G that I already do have and have already tested. Today's that day. So the Ryzen 5600 by itself, no X, no G, or anything like that, is a full-blown Zen 3 product, sort of like the 5600X is, not to be confused with the 5600G, the G being graphics. That processor actually is built on the previous Zen generation, that previous architecture. This is built on the Zen 3 architecture, which is going to be outdated in a couple of months anyway, but if we can take a look at that. Let's see, 5600. It's a little bit slower than the 5600X, which is still priced a little bit higher. It does fall down into the budget range of $150 or below, and so that's kind of why we're taking a look at it. We're going to compare this as closely as we can. There will be some differences. It's not going to quite be apples to apples, but we'll match it up fairly close. We're going to compare this to the 11400F. Yes, I know the 11400F will have a little bit lower clock speed, but it's also a 6-core, 12-thread, and we can kind of get an idea of what budget CPU versus budget CPU is, one from Intel, one from AMD. Now, I am going to test this eventually against the 3700X, which I do have in my editing rig. Now, this might be a pretty close estimation because that 3700X was an older generation. This is a newer generation, newer technology. It does have better instructions per clock. It does, in some cases, run faster. So we'll just have to see how all that pans out. And I will try to do that as close apples to apples as I can as well. But for the time being, what we're going to do with this little buddy right here, this Ryzen 5, is we're going to go ahead and put it on a B550 from ASRock, the Steel Legend B550M. We're going to check that out. We're also going to put, it's going to be slightly different SSD. I think I've got an NVMe in there with the Intel right now. I'm going to use AX2. It's a 512 gig kit. This has NAND flash and SLC memory, which just means it's effective. It's not going to be the fastest you can get. It is a regular 2.5-inch SSD, but I've already looked at the AX2, so I'm going to take a look at the AX2, which is a separate product line, but still very fairly priced. I'm also going to go ahead and use the same case that the Intel is in right now. Yes, the Sauna, the hot box, and that maybe that's a good name for it, is the hot box. That pink case that is from ES Games, I think it is, and it's just not a great case, but I want it to be a close test. I want to be able to see under the same conditions, using the stock cooler and everything, of what this is going to end up being. Also going to test using the RX 6600 XT that I already do have, and I will go ahead and leave the same case fans, and I'm going to use the same memory. Right now, it's got some Crucial Ballistics running at 3000, which means that the Ryzen will not hit that sweet spot. That sweet spot for a Ryzen is usually 32 or 36. It likes those speeds pretty well. It's stepping down to 3000, but I might also try it with some 3200 mega transfer memory to see how much of a difference that might make. So Intel processors don't really care. AMD processors tend to care a little bit more, but it's getting better. It's getting better. So we're going to go ahead and I'm not going to do a tutorial on how to assemble or disassemble or build a computer this time around. I don't even know if I'm going to give footage of the actual build itself. I will have to see you during editing, so you get to find out along with me. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put all this stuff in the same box that has the Intel thing, which means I will have to be worried about the same temps. And I'm going to be looking at temps as well as the performance to see how it stacks up against that 11400F. So it is several days later, and I've done about all the benchmarking I can manage, or I can stand right now. Did try to keep things, like I said, as close to even as I could. Primary differences between the Intel and the AMD setup was the B560 was an Asus board for the Intel, and the B550 ASRock board was for AMD. I did have a boot drive that was separate for each one, NVMe on the Intel and regular SSD for the AMD, but considering that all of it was done off of all the games were done off my external SSD, I don't think that's going to make much of a difference. I think we should be okay there. So again, I tested these as close as I could using the same memory, stock coolers for each one, the same case, that hot box that's over my left shoulder there, same graphics card, that's the ASRock Challenger 6600 XT, RX 6600 XT. I try to keep them the same as I could. And overall, if you're getting either one of these, if you have one setup or another setup, and you're thinking about bailing and going for the other one, these are both at budget prices here, are both in the $150 range. And if you've already got an Intel setup that's 10th generation, you're going to that. Or if you've already got an AM4 platform, I would don't worry about trying to swap for one for the other because it's newer or something like that. Both of these are going to be capable. Both of these are going to be good. And we're going to go ahead and show you that in just a second. One thing I got to tell you, if my sound is off, I'm so sorry. I'm finishing up with a sinus infection, and I couldn't tell as much of my voice as I can on the recording, so I apologize for that. But anyway, we're going to go straight into the benchmarks. We're going to take a look at, first thing, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This is a small little victory for AMD. It did perform a little bit better. It is an older title, newer AMD CPU, but it turned out okay. This turned out performing pretty well, but not everything is that well, because we look at Borderlands 3, and Borderlands 3 eked out a tiny little, 20 to 30% victory for the Intel, the i5 processor. That surprised me a little bit, because if I remember right, Borderlands 3 was optimized for AMD. I have to go back and look at that, but in any case, it was pretty noticeable. Far Cry 6, a new addition. We took Far Cry 5 out of my lineup, put Far Cry 6 in the lineup. It's a newer game. Went back and redid, like I said, a bunch of benchmarks, trying to catch up on old data to make sure I have current data and current benchmarks on all these, so I can test them and compare them. With Far Cry 6, this is a small win for Intel. I don't know if it's too noticeable, but it's noticeable enough, and it does come out. You can tell the difference, especially in the benchmarks. There's a little bit of a difference. Not as big of a difference as Forza Horizon 5. That's noticeable. Then watching the benchmarks, playing the game a little bit, very noticeable, and there is a difference for the i5 here. And you're thinking about this time, well, maybe this i5 is just going to run away with everything. Not so fast. World War Z, that actually kind of tips the scales back in the other direction a little bit. A win for AMD, and we might have some hope here. Both of these are looking actually pretty good overall when you talk about it. If you weren't comparing them to each other, you would think really these are pretty good marks. Horizon Zero Dawn is always our equalizer, and it always gives me some of the biggest surprises and weirdest things in benchmarks when I do that. And this was no exception. They swapped back and forth. And a note about all these being in 1080p. I test in 1080p because when you're testing CPUs, that becomes the bottleneck. That becomes the thing that has to do the most work, especially when you have a graphics card that's very capable of 1080p, 1440p, maybe even 4K. The CPU has to do more work than the GPU. So when you limit that frame rate, or when you limit that resolution, your CPU has to work harder, and that's why a lot of people use that as a CPU benchmark, is just 1080p, and for graphics they'll go with 1440p, 4K, and so on. So again, Horizon Zero Dawn was kind of weird here. They kind of went back and forth even at 1080p. We also added Assassin's Creed Valhalla to the benchmarks. This was surprising. I didn't expect AMD to be, that much of a win. It was pretty convincing. I'm sorry I don't have any background video for this for the benchmark test, but I wasn't expecting AMD to be that big of a difference, but it was noticeable. Now, don't get me wrong. These games, this game looked great going with either one, with either CPU. But I was a little bit surprised to see that the AMD was such a big difference with this one. Our esports title, CSGO, both of these were well over 350 frames per second. When you're running with a 144 hertz monitor, you can't tell. Now, there was a difference in numbers for the Intel, yes. But when you're gaming at 144 hertz or 120 hertz or even 60 hertz or something like that, now in esports, yeah, you're better off playing at a higher refresh rate. But when you're playing at 144 hertz, fundamentally, you can't tell the difference. If you didn't do a benchmark test to find out, you would never be able to tell the difference in these two. Both ran really smooth. Both ran really well. Both of them had very, very high frame rates. And you might be thinking, okay, but Paul, you ran this with the Crucial Ballistics memory that was running at 3,000 megatransfers, and everybody knows that AMD usually runs better at a higher clock speed. So I do have a set of G-Skill Ripjaws 5 that we went ahead and did. It's got 3,200 megatransfers per second. I ran these, I ran that, a whole new set of benchmarks all the way down top to bottom, and found that statistically it made almost no difference. It only made a difference in 3 games. It made a difference in Borderlands 3, World War Z, and it made a difference worse when we went to Forza Horizon 5. Horizon 5 is another new one that we put in, but it was a little bit better on the 2 previous, and it was noticeably worse, like 3 or 4% worse on Forza Horizon 5. So I really wasn't expecting that either. That was a major surprise. But the memory didn't make really any difference at all. So what that kind of tells me is maybe AMD has solved some of these cycle problems that faster memory gives them an advantage of. It's not going to be as susceptible, especially if it's close. Now, I wouldn't go back and run it at 2400 or maybe 2133, the stock speed for most memory. I wouldn't run it back at those. But if you're anything 3000, 3200, 3600 or whatever, you're probably going to be fine. It's not going to make as big of a difference as it might have on older generations. So just an observation there. But I did go back and I retested everything. That case presented some other problems. When I was trying to put the SSD in that case, I found that the hard drive cage, or in this case, the slot for the SSD, was just very difficult to work in. I mean, you couldn't tighten down the SSD and then plug the connectors in. You had to attach it, plug the connectors in, then tighten it down. Otherwise, you weren't getting the cables in at all. And so it's just that, along with other things with this case, it's just a very, very poor design. And it's something that really, I mean, I'm not going to give a link anywhere to the case because you guys should not even be thinking about buying it. It's a project. But what we are going to make as a project probably later is I'm going to find a way to make this case better. I'm going to find a way to try to increase the airflow or maybe put some more fans in the front or do whatever and see if we can't make this a better case than they made it. I believe it was ES Games or ES Gaming or something like that. But regardless, we're going to see if we can't make this a little bit better. This Intel setup that I was, and I did a kind of a follow-up putting into a new case when I took a look at the Maycube 310 case. I was going to use that as my gaming PC and put it in the living room. But as it turns out, I might be making a computer for my friend Dustin. And I think that part of those Intel parts are going to go for his computer. Now, a shout out to Dustin. He is a world-ranked Smite player. Look it up. I mean, but you know what? He's ranked, and he plays on console, and he's playing against people on PC, and he plays on console, and he's world ranked. And so we're going to see if we can't get him a PC, get him figured out, so maybe he can go ahead and take that #1 ranking. Kudos to him, and we're going to get that done. Also going to go ahead and test this Ryzen 5 5600 against an older 3700X to see if an older generation with more cores can hold up or is better still than a newer generation that only has 6 cores, 12 threads. Thanks to everybody that lately has been subscribing and pushed me up over 500. Right now, when I put the links to these, they're probably not going to be affiliate links. I will probably change that. Well, there's a lot of probablys, huh? I will be changing that before too long, but I will label it when I do because I've got enough subscribers now that I can get on some of these affiliate programs. And so I will clearly label which those are, but for the time being, until I do that, it won't be an affiliate link. But I'll go ahead and link the Intel, the 11400, and the Ryzen 5 5600, and all that stuff down there. I'm not going to link that case. No, nobody needs to be buying that case. I will probably go ahead and link that SSD though, because that SSD was pretty solid. Maybe I'll do some crystal disk mark checks on that to see how that holds up to some of the other SSDs and NVMe drives and all that stuff I've tested. So maybe coming up. Anyway, that is all I have for right now. So don't be afraid to join me on the other socials. Do all those YouTube things. I seriously, I appreciate it. And I'm only going to ask you to do one other thing. And I ask you to do this every video from here on. It's just be nice to somebody. Be nice to each other. Be nice to somebody. Do something random nice. Hold the door open. Smile. Wave. Say good morning. Something. Anything. Because you might find that somebody does that back to you. And it's a pretty good feeling when somebody's nice to you, isn't it? I mean, even if you're having a bad day and somebody acknowledges you, it kind of makes you feel a little bit better, doesn't it? So go out there and do that for each other. That is all I have for this time. So until next time, when I'm looking at some other stuff, I'll see you later.